Okay, I'm talking with Bill Kaysing, and Bill Kaysing is what you might call a pioneer in this whole issue of getting at truth and reality, and specifically in the area of the Apollo moon missions, what happened and what didn't happen. And when the module set down on the surface of the moon, the amount of propulsion that would have been required to do that, and it leaves no cloud of dust, no crater.
Right. Having seen hundreds of rocket firings when I was employed by Rocketdyne, I know that the jet of the lunar module lander, the lunar lander, would have created an enormous crater. It would have scoured the moon's surface. It would have tossed up rocks, sand, everything, and created a crater maybe so large that the entire lunar lander could have sunk into it. After all, we're dealing with a 10,000-pound thrust engine, which is pointed directly at the surface, lowered into the surface, and yet, if you look at pictures of the lunar lander on the moon, there is no disturbance whatsoever under the lunar lander's rocket.
And no dust deposited in the pads, the cup-shaped pads at the bottom.
That's another good point. Dust would have been blown 6 ways from Sunday and would have landed everywhere.
And then the famous scene, which has been played over and over, where they are landing there, but they're setting down, and you're hearing the astronaut talking through it.
Oh, that's a good point. I let's say, became aware of that only recently, that here's Neil Armstrong talking about landing on the moon with a microphone, and yet he's sitting practically on top of a rocket engine that is putting out sound levels of about 140 or 150 decibels. Now, we know that that is absolutely impossible to overcome that sound level inside the lunar lander with a normal human voice.
Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over. Roger, copy. Eagle, Houston, after you.
Speaker is Professor James McKinney.
If you double the size of your rocket, you don't double the size of your payload. So you're very limited, and now let's try and get to the next planet or out to the moon. We have to start sending individual things up there, couple them together, and then go out to these other planets. By the way, there's a small problem with going to the moon, and inch by inch, NASA is leaking out that they know that there's a problem there. It's called the Van Allen belts, high radiation belts of charged particles around Earth, and we don't know how to get through them, they say. Well, isn't that interesting, because there sure didn't seem to be a problem back in 1969. Obviously, they didn't go to the moon. The United States did not go to the moon. The Russians knew it all along. I thought at the time we did, but I've since learned we absolutely did not. And there's no question about it. And they're starting to figure it out. NASA has a program called Living with a Star. That's a pretty name for how do we get through the Van Allen belts. They have all their top scientists working on it. It's a tremendous problem because we do not have any kind of a spacecraft that we can send up that doesn't have metal in it. And when these charged particles hit metal, they produce X-rays. Nothing you can do to get around that. So anybody sitting around something metal in outer space in the Van Allen belts is going to be French fried. And so that whole thing was a giant hoax. And you have second and third tier scientists in the United States who are running around saying, oh, yes, we did, yes, we did. But the very top level people, what I call the tier 1 scientists, the Black Op Mills scientists, know for a fact we didn't go. And it's a real problem. They don't know how to get through there. This picture is with the new Hubble camera, and it shows that, in fact, if you take this angular distance out to Pluto and you translate it into the surface of the moon, we can, in fact, resolve the landing sites, the alleged lunar landing sites. And the way you would do this is you take the pictures at dusk when the shadows became very long, and it would be a very hard thing for them to fake. So at any rate, we have telescopes on Earth that are much larger than the Hubble. Much better resolving power. So why, you would think these astronomers would be chomping at the bit to show you those lunar landing sites, and look at the incredible resolving power of this telescope we have here. Why have none of them done that? Because there ain't nothing there. And we get all kinds of excuses. Oh, we can't turn the telescope up there because the moon's too bright. Well, then all of a sudden we saw the full moon on a web page, on a NASA web page, the entire full moon taken with the Hubble Space Telescope. And you're telling me they can't take one little teeny patch of the moon, which is millions of times less bright. So bottom line is, they know they didn't go.
Nor spacecraft, which can protect the occupants from radiation. NASA convinced the American people to pay $40 billion for the space program.
The most lethal forms of radiation, of course, are at the higher end of the spectrum. That's gamma rays and X-rays. We know what ultraviolet can do. If you stay out too long in the sun, you get sunburn and skin cancer and die, and it's all very sad. But gamma rays, and X-rays especially, are particularly lethal to humans, unprotected humans. There was no protection that I have been able to identify. I've found no reference to it. I found nothing that will tell me what level of protection is offered, so I have to assume none was. I've contacted the manufacturers of the spacesuits, and they said there was no radiation protection built into the spacesuits, because I asked them if these same spacesuits could be used by technicians to go to Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, because the nuclear reactors produce the same radiation as produced in space. And they said no, not advisable, no protection.
Subscribe, like and share this video.